I didn't plan for that moment in my life. So when I was leaving, my mother-in-law came to me because I was invited it, and you can't leave your car, so my mother-in-law had to leave her one eye so get me to drop me off at a dozen.
I still have the parent hat on though, and I'm thinking about
So did I.
that
I have
close
not called her
contact.
dad yet.
Yeah.
He does not know that's where I left her. So I'll call him after this meeting. I'll blame him. He's been up there. That took me for just over the phone, and I was like,
Excuse me, did I hear this right?
she's like, everybody is. But she said she called on me.
But still, just leaving
But
it
still,
hanging like.
Thank you all for joining us. We have almost everyone here. We will have all of our board members here shortly. So we will get started. And Dr. Crane is already down at the end of the table to get started. So I will start with asking for a motion to approve our minutes.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please note by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Hearing none, the minutes pass. Thank you very much. As you all are aware, we are now in the 6500 series, and so we will continue through that series with a list of policies. And then the last policy is in the 4000, which is under discussion. I want to make note before we get ourselves started that, as you all know, most of you completed a policy survey or share with me your policy ideas. We will continue to stay in order of the policy series. So we will continue to go 6,000, 7,000 series to the migration. And then each policy meeting, we will put a topic that you all included in your policy committee survey that will either be a review of the policy or discussion of the policy. There are about 2 policies that we're not sure we will get through by the end of the year, but I've talked to the chair and the vice chair about if we can't get to everything people listed, we may put them on work session, but my goal is to attempt to address all of the issues that you all saw as priorities. And if we don't, I will keep you posted for the things that we may not get to. So that is what you will see the structure of our agenda. It will look like that for the remainder of the year. And as you all know, we're out in July, so July there won't be one. But please continue to provide feedback. the policy committee is, I would say, next to hiring the superintendent, is our biggest job. It determines how we govern ourselves. And so I want to make sure that the policy committee and our structure meets your needs to feel like you have what you need to govern accordingly. So please continue. And Dr. Crane and Dr. Robinson both have been amazing, helping to ensure that we create a space where people feel like they're getting what they need. So please feel free to continue to give us feedback. And thank you for letting me take that point of privilege to describe our structure moving forward with committee meetings. All right, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Crane.
So we're bringing you today 3 policies for migration. They are new policies for us, and they fall in the equipment, materials, and supplies division of the purchasing department. So as we look at these policies today, I just want you to remember that they are under the umbrella of equipment, materials, and supplies. How we purchase, how we manage, how we provide, take care of the equipment, materials, and supplies within the district. So that's the umbrella we're bringing you these policies under today. And I'll invite Deborah Wallace, Senior Director of Purchasing, and Trish Posey, who are Finance Officer, to the table. We'll have some additional staff join us as we move through these policies so that we are able to answer your question and assure you that we have vetted the policies through all the appropriate staff in the district to make sure everyone is on board. So we'll start with 6530, resource conservation. Ms. Wallace.
Thank you. Basically, this policy, as we purchase, procure, store, dispose of, that type of thing in the purchasing department, these cover 6 areas that we concentrate on, both internally, and as you see the first bullet point, talks about across the district, introducing the same, I don't want to use the word mindset, that's kind of what that really is, across the district for waste reduction and recycling. Number 2 on that, reducing the consumption of consumable materials whenever possible. That is another point that we drive home not only to our teams, but also to the vendors that we work with. As far as things that we have shipped into us, we try to minimize the amount of packing materials, the way it's brought in, reducing the use of peanuts for packing, as well as using cardboard, those types of things that can be recycled, palletizing things rather than using a lot of extra things to ship with. Number 3, it's near and dear to my heart, fully utilizing all materials prior to disposal. I'm one of those people that shakes a cartridge before she throws it away. And so we try to push that as well to not only the vendors, but internal staff as we're purchasing. That goes to materials and things that are deemed surplus by the district. If a school deems something surplus, we bring it back, we try to repurpose it and reuse it before we recycle or before we dispose of it, trying to keep as much out of the landfills as possible. Minimizing the use of non-biodegradable products. We work with CNS in particular for that. They're trying to eliminate the use of styrofoam by buying trays and items that compost. The next bullet point, purchasing recycled products. We put that in our bid list as well when we're asking vendors to submit both their products. We ask them for the recycled content and that type of thing as well. And then the final one is it's a fairly large one for the district that we've been working on for a while, is encouraging suppliers to make the recyclable products available to us. We did a study on, and for instance, it talks about unbleached paper products here. We did a study on the white paper towels versus the brown paper towels. Everybody hates the brown paper towel because they say it doesn't absorb as much as the white paper towel, but the actual brown paper towel is environmentally friendly compared to the bleached towel, and the difference to the district in cost would be anywhere from $140,000 to $200,000 a year for the bleached materials. So those are the kind of things we look at as well. So this policy kind of gives the overall effort that's being put forth to try to move the needle that way. Bid documents that we put out, we ask for the vendors to minimize the amount of paper that they use to submit back to us, and we ask them to be conscious of the way that they are proposing shipping and that type of thing as well.
Do you have any questions about this policy? We also have our attorney, Neil Ramey, here with us today, and he works with us specifically on this series of policies, so glad to have him with us today.
Perfect. Thank you for introducing Mr. Ring. Vice Chair Hagerty.
Thank you. So these series of policies are in the 6,000 series. And if you go back to 6,000, these are about like support services. And so I went to check services that help the school system use resources necessary for an educational program in an effective and efficient manner. So this, we've talked about things like paper, cartridges, but how inclusive is the term resources? I mean, is it so expansive? Do you think it could get into like energy consumption, or is it just office supplies, or are building materials resources? How far do you see that definition going?
We had a conversation earlier. We do have a policy in our current manual, 7450, energy conservation and management. And this policy in the old manual currently, and it is our current policy, really speaks to maintenance and operations, facility construction, materials, et cetera. So that policy better speaks to that. We will bring that, and so we've made the decision to bring that in our 9,000 series policies, which will deal with facilities and operations. We feel it's a better fit there, and it speaks to energy, construction, et cetera, the very items that you mentioned as far as how far does resources go.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Ms. Caulfield.
I appreciate this actually. I am one of those recycle items. Shake, reuse, reshake. It's happened a couple more times. But years ago, I was able to work with an organization. It was Eritrea Counts, and they came to the schools, kind of like volunteering, and they taught the kids how to use and recycle. So I really appreciated that, and it was kind of like a pilot thing. I don't know that it really kind of stuck or took off, but they did use recyclable trays, and they talked about stuff like that. Is that a program or something that you're trying to incorporate with these?
We work with CNS on that particular piece, trying to help them source the materials. The quantities they use are enormous. And last summer and the summer before, and it really kicked off pretty strongly during the COVID time period when they were providing extra meals and that type of thing. We were trying to look for those items that were not styrofoam, not plastic, and we did find some resources for them. And they've migrated toward that, and they use quite a bit of that. There's a group, and I can't remember, in Wake County, and Superintendent Moore, you may know of them. They work with a program each year where they introduce different things. And for a while, we were receiving emails from them about opportunities they were doing in school and making sure that they were offering availability to resources and that type of thing. And I haven't heard from that group. Probably in the last year I haven't heard from them, but it usually picks up toward the end of the spring where they do some type of program where they get the kids involved in it. But again, like I said, I haven't heard from them this year. And it's through Wake County, but I'm not quite sure, and I can't remember which programs were involved. But I know that they would let the kids design art projects and things like that out of environmentally acceptable materials and that type of thing. And we help them process through our courier service the different projects and things, but I haven't heard from them this year.
I did hear from another group that, and I don't remember who I voted on to, so I'll go and check and see if that's not something that we can explore. And the other thing is, I had somebody recently come to me about another, like a cleaning company, and I'm not sure exactly how that works, but with the recycling products, like the Clorox wipes, and that was the main concern, is that the kids, they clean their desk off, they use the Clorox wipes, they throw them out, and then they sit down and eat. So I think for her, she was trying to give information about, how cost effective it is, and it's kind of the same in line that way. Is that something that we could explore using this with like recycling, like because the Clorox wipes, we're throwing it out, right? It is necessary in school for them to be able to clean, but
we do not provide Clorox wipes to the schools. What we are providing them is an Oxivir solution, which is basically in a 50-gallon drum, and the brown towels, and they spray and use. And some of those, you actually can just spray and leave, and you don't have to wipe down. So that if they're using Clorox wipes or whatever, it's not something that's coming out of inventory being dispersed to the schools through custodial or through our inventory.
Yeah, I think it was more requested, like on the teacher wish list of send that in. So this Oxivir, if I'm saying that right, that's the product that they use in the classrooms?
It is.
Okay.
Well, it's the one we provide.
Question. So when I noticed that several of these items says whenever possible. So if you were given the option of two products, one that is more environmentally conscious versus another one that is cheaper, what is your decision-making process for that?
And Neil, correct me if I'm wrong, but our language is the lowest responsible bid. So if a recycled product comes in lower than the other one, it would definitely be the
That's it, yeah.
recycled. If they're neck and neck and it's very, very close, we're going to look at it closely, and we're going to check delivery, we're going to check packaging, we're going to check all of that and see what is the best value for the district. If it means we don't have to dispose of that in a way that's going to be an added cost to the district or anything like that, that would make the recycled product the lowest responsive. So by law, it's the lowest responsible bid, but we have to take into consideration the best value for the district.
There's also downstream costs as well, yes.
If you need 10 paper towels to do the work of one, you probably don't save that much.
I've bought those. Not good.
Other questions? Anything else, Ms. Vaughn? Were you talking to us, Ms. Wallace? Sorry. Okay. All right, no other questions? Okay, hearing none, thank you for answering our questions. And we will move this on to first reading.
I think you need a
Motion.
call to vote.
Oh,
Yeah, we need a motion to move it. to
Chair
first
Johnson Hostler, I would move that we move this to first reading before the board.
reading. Thank you. All in favor, please note by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Hearing none, we'll move to first reading. Thank you. And you want to
Policy
see
on the
this?
list.
What? Is Cecil coming or no? Oh, I didn't even see him over there.
Yeah. Our next policy on the list is hazardous materials. And the policy leads off with some introductory language, just defining what those are by substance or mixture of substances that poses a fire, explosive, reactive, or health hazard, and as more fully defined by law. We made one minor revision in the second paragraph as advised by our attorneys, that the superintendent or designee, as well as principals and other building level supervisors, shall oversee compliance with applicable laws and regulations and the following board requirements. And there are three board requirements there: that purchasing, storing, handling, transporting, and disposing hazardous materials must be addressed in a reasonably safe manner. The second one, substituting less dangerous substances for hazardous materials should be done whenever feasible. And number three, training will be provided to appropriate school personnel on precautions to prevent accidents and handle accidents in the event they occur. So these would be the board guidelines that would serve the superintendent or designee, as well as principals and other building level supervisors, shall oversee compliance with any laws and regulations. Following that, we struck another paragraph. We pulled up into that second paragraph, and we had that revision, so that's encompassed there. Finally, the latter part of the policy speaks to anyone who's concerned that hazardous materials aren't being handled properly, or something may cause an unreasonable risk, should notify the principal, building level supervisor, or superintendent immediately. And the last paragraph speaks to that it's not the intent of the board to expand or modify the school system's potential liability exposure through the adoption of this policy. that our voluntary compliance with any statute or regulation to which we are not otherwise subject will not be construed to create or assume any potential liability under local, state, or federal law or regulation.
Thank you. And Cesar Bell, our attorney, has joined us at the table.
And just a quick question for Joe. In Assembly, I did not see the edits that you just described to the policy, but I don't know if it was submitted separately or if I'm just not seeing the updated
Yeah,
version.
our version doesn't
See the
have.
You didn't see
strikeouts.
you didn't see the strikeouts.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. I was like, our version
Yeah.
doesn't have a strike through.
So we could walk through them again.
Sorry, that's why I didn't call you Ms. Edmonds. I was like, we don't have to like that.
I think what's posted is the original
It
NCSBA
is.
policy. The only edits that we made in consultation with staff were the ones that Julie just described. We can walk through them again if you'd like, or I can figure out a way to get you the written copy. But it's basically, we took out you see the sentence that says, towards the end of the policy, the superintendent, principals, and other building level supervisors shall monitor compliance with this policy, administrative procedures, and applicable laws and regulations. That was deleted. And instead, that concept is inserted up above. So the sentence that currently reads, the superintendent shall develop procedures or programs as necessary. That seemed to be like in the nature of shall develop regulations and procedures, which of course means if the superintendent doesn't have regulations and procedures on day one, she's in violation of the policy. So I thought it better to just say the superintendent or designee shall oversee compliance, and that leaves more flexibility as to whether you need an RP or simply just need some staff training and oversight. So the revised language there would read, the superintendent or designee, as well as principals and other building level supervisors, shall oversee compliance with applicable laws and regulations and the following board requirements. And then the rest of the policy is the same.
So you're kind of taking that sentence afterwards and incorporating into
Taking the
one above?
right, the reference to building level supervisors and principals, that's pulled up ahead. And this is optional. I mean, you all can keep this policy as is. It's presented by the School Board Association. It's legally compliant policy. None of this is really required by law. It's really up to you. The edits that I made in consultation with staff was simply to say that instead of saying the superintendent shall develop procedures and programs, it says the superintendent designee will monitor compliance with this policy, including the specific items enumerated. It leaves more flexibility to how to oversee the policy.
So, quick question. I want to make sure so some people, do you need to see it? That's
Yeah,
my concern for some
it's-
people. I'm like, is it better if you see it
It does
first?
sound like we're taking the responsibility away from, I mean, even just the principal and building super is, it sounds like monitoring and making sure that's
Maybe shared
happening is being withdrawn and just saying, we shall make a policy. Hopefully somebody sees it.
Yeah, that's why I think it's better if we see
We can
it.
Yeah.
forward it by email. Would you like?
That would be
Yeah.
good.
Should I do that right now?
Yes.
I'll send it to the. Do we have the whole
If you
board
send
here?
board members.
Not Lindsay.
So, Ms. Matthews here, so.
Okay, I'll just send it to the entire board if I can. Do that
Yeah.
with my email since we're all here.
This was my error. I apologize, everyone.
That's okay. I was like, well, let me refresh. I don't see a strike through.
I apologize.
All right, let me see, how do I do this? Here we go. I'll forward it in just a second so you can see it. But to the point, I think the idea is shared responsibility, not to reduce responsibility, but it's shared responsibility on the part of principals, building level supervisors, and the superintendent.
So it's not
All-
just the
all
superintendent
oversee
is what
compliance.
you're
Not just
saying.
the superintendent will develop a regulation. It's everybody in the district will help monitor compliance. That's the idea. So-
Neil, I believe we also wanted to stay away
Yeah,
from.
that's why I was like, I can't.
Regulations.
Because I thought I
got it.
OSHA governs a lot of what we do. They regulate what we do if there's hazardous materials.
Sorry, Ms. Posey, we can't hear you. but-
Oh, sorry, I was saying we didn't want to create our own regulations because there's a lot of federal regulations that already exist, yes. So.
And the language really is not great language on the part of the School Boards Association to say, shall develop procedures or programs as necessary.
It sounds very
Yeah,
optional.
as necessary as shall kind of don't.
They don't go together.
Okay, I'm just clicking send on the email to all board members. It might take a minute to get through my server and yours.
Yeah, I was just thinking that all these should be already, federal rules and,
So much of this is, that's correct. I mean, so like managing of hazardous waste is statutory, so a large part of this policy is comply with the law, which you don't need a policy to say that, but for what it's worth, it does say that.
But sometimes they tell us that we have to have a policy to do what they've already told us we have to
Right.
do anyway.
This is not one of those cases. That's true. Sometimes you have to have a policy that says what the law already says you have to do. This is not
Like
one.
how long buses are allowed to idle, that I think is.
Did you send us the same exact thing that's on Assembly?
What I sent you should be a red line, a Microsoft track changes red line.
I don't have a red line through it, I just have what?
Well, we already had
You got it, and it's not any different? I wonder if, let me see. Did I send the wrong one?
I didn't get it.
I didn't receive any.
Fix my computer. Yeah, I don't have any.
It's not, yeah, you're right, it's not red line.
You're right, that's not showing that it's, okay, I don't know what happened there. Let me try this again.
Julie, who's,
I'm working on it.
oh, okay.
Are you going to send it to me? Okay, Julie will be.
I'm working on it. I apologize, everyone.
Do we, is Russ, Mr. Smith, are you ready while she pulls that up? Any chance?
Table this for now.
So we can skip to the vandalism, 65.
I think Mr. Smith is ready.
Just got some.
Attachment didn't,
I just got
I just put the edits in email. I didn't do a red line. I did a red line within the body of the email.
You should receive a
I'll-
PDF from me
Okay.
that shows the blue line strikers.
Yes, I can see it
Got it.
now.
Got it.
Excellent.
I can't get it on my computer, but it came to my iPad immediately. Well, no, it's still not on my computer. It's only on my iPad.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah. I don't even have Neil's email yet on my computer, but.
You can see them? Yes. Thank you. I'm so glad my cheeks can stop being red.
Sorry, Mrs. Smith, I think they're ready. My apologies. Dr. Crane was making it work quickly.
We're,
So, yeah, so we can move forward with you, that's what.
I like this revision.
yeah, okay.
That's good.
Okay.
Sorry about that, Mr. Smith.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Vice Chair Hagerty.
So I just want to make sure I understand the change. One thing that I think is important that was under the old language, and I think this language captures it, but I just want to make sure I get it. I think it's important that the superintendent or designee be the one to develop the procedures or programs, whereas I think you could have the superintendent, principals, or other building level supervisors monitoring compliance. I just wanted to make sure that you're not having different sets of rules in different buildings. I'm trying to make sure that we have some sort of uniformity.
I would almost guarantee that all of the rules, especially rules set by OSHA, are the same regardless of workplace location, school building, maintenance, garage, classroom, my office upstairs, this boardroom are all the same, and would not be different. Am I speaking out of turn?
I think it's mostly, just comply with the statutes. It falls in that. But it's a great point, and I think but Jonathan's position in mind is that the superintendent can always develop regulations and procedures and protocols, whether the policy says she shall or not, right? So to the extent there's any district-wide guidance is necessary beyond what the statutes already provide, the superintendent can do that. You don't need a policy to direct her to develop that regulation. That's why I wanted to provide more flexibility, that it's not strictly necessary to have the regulations and procedures. What is necessary is to comply with this policy. The superintendent can adopt an RFP if she
And
would
it's
like.
kind of understood by number 3, I mean, training will be provided, so that.
Right.
that assuming that there is some kind of a training module.
There's an expectation of training that would be developed by Right, and the superintendent, I understand Mr. Haggerty's point. You wouldn't want different training, radically different training at each school, developed only by the principal at each school. I would say that falls within the bucket of the superintendent can already has the authority as the superintendent to tell the staff, here's what the training will look like. So you can ensure that consistency anyway. If you want to tweak the language, I don't have a problem with it.
And so you understand, like, the nuance that I'm talking about here, that the original language didn't say shall comply with the law, because
Right.
we don't need that, right? But it said shall develop procedures and programs, which is different than just compliance with the law. But now we're taking that out. So there won't be any procedures or programs specially directing people toward certain ways that we might handle certain materials where discretion is given under the law.
There can be, but the
But it's not
revision
directed
does
by
not
policy.
mandate it. That's correct. And if you prefer to mandate there be express regulations, district-wide regulations on these issues, you could go back to that language that's in the original
Okay.
policy. It's not.
Is there any reason that we would need to have something that specific set out in policy?
Anytime that we mandate something, I'm always cautionary, because if we've got to be able to do what we say we're going to do. Okay, so that's always a concern in my office. But just to let you know, that incorporated into safety procedures, there are training modules that are inside those safety procedures, like our chemistry lab instructors. They have procedures that they follow when they're handling something that's hazardous. Same way with our custodial services. They take training, safety, that incorporates some of how do you handle chemicals that might be hazardous. Now, they're not handling anything, extremely hazardous, but they are handling things that could be reactionary to the skin or something like that. Something similar to what Deborah just talked about with the oxyfuel. So, and again, before some of those chemicals ever get there, going through the purchasing department, those things that might create a problem are pared down. So it's there. Then also, on top of that, when members of my office go into a school to maybe just do a walkthrough or inspection, they're looking at these certain things. Fire marshal's office, when they come in, they check materials that are in schools. Now, fire marshal's office is in our schools twice a year. Some of our central services and Rock Quarry locations, they fall under a different fire marshal's office, so they're only one to two times a year. But our environmental and grounds department is sort of our go-to lead on this. We work with their office when something comes in that might be reported, like someone's discovered some old chemicals in a chemistry lab, to make sure that we dispose of those properly.
And that's a great example where that's statutory. So you see the legal references here at the bottom. The Resource Conservation Recovery Act's like 50 pages, North Carolina statute, and there's some federal law as well. So most of the time when you're talking about oil spills or toxic waste of any kind, you're going to have to just comply with the law. The policy already says that. It's really just those three enumerated items is all that this policy goes beyond. To summarize, it's just one is use reasonably safe options instead of hazardous materials, to substitute less dangerous materials when feasible, and to train staff. So that's all the policy does beyond what is legally required.
And if I could just sort of bring us back to the title of the policy. It is hazardous materials, so it is unlikely to contemplate an RMP that doesn't have federal regulations or other regulations already in place, because the title of the policy is hazardous materials.
So do you know if there'll be RP, or are we saying if there is, then that's what it'll consist of?
Well, right. RMP on purpose is something that doesn't have to be in place, but right now, if I were to contemplate what an RMP would look like, it would be reiterating what some of those federal statutes and requirements are for different hazardous materials. Those do change frequently, and if it is of value to have it available to people, as a link off of the policy, then because it's all in one place, that could be helpful. I cannot contemplate right now what might go in there beyond things that we're already required to do, but for the sake of having it accessible, it might be called for, as opposed to.
You'd have to keep it updated.
Right.
That's the downside, is that now we have you don't have a school board's model on that, so somebody would have to review, because we would have to review it periodically and update as the law changes.
I might be asking too much, so I hope that the links would automatically be the updated link, especially if it's linked to OSHA, but that's might be wishing too much for the state as well.
Great.
What's your Haggerty?
So, and just to follow up on the chair's question, oversee compliance with applicable laws and regulations. We're going to do that, but then it says, and the following board requirements. And then the requirements have like training will be provided to appropriate school personnel and precautions to prevent accidents, to handle accidents in the event that they occur. So are we saying that it's just going to be the training that's required by OSHA or required by law? Or is this a new board requirement for additional training that's outside of that? Because if none of these three things are board requirements, but are applicable laws and regulations, I guess what of those, it's set out to suggest that those three are something new, that the board is requiring over and above applicable laws and regulations.
I think they are. I don't think that any of these three are actually captured in the North Carolina statute or the federal laws. So these are just, this is the model NCSBA policy, and they're just to be reasonably safe, which seems like a good idea for anyone in any circumstance, to use less hazardous materials when possible, and to train staff.
Some of these would be best practice.
And I guess that's what I'm confused on, because at first it sounded like, well, we don't need procedures or programs because all of this is going to be dictated to us by OSHA and other federal standards. But now we're saying, but these three are separate outside of OSHA and the other federal standards, and so then maybe we would need some sort of RMP or
So
best
to implement
practice.
1, 2, and 3, what are the district guidelines?
Yeah.
And that you could have, it just in my view, you could direct the superintendent to develop regulations. If you think this is too vague, we need across the board, district-wide, then you can go back to the original language, and then she would be required to adopt an RMP with specifics on 1, 2, and 3. Or you can you don't need to reference RMP. The superintendent always can adopt RMP if she just decides it's appropriate and necessary. Or you can go with the edits that we provided, which say to oversight compliance. In my mind, overseeing compliance encompasses the concept of RMP if she thinks it's necessary, or it could be a memo, or it could be checking in on staff periodically to make sure they're doing things appropriately. It leaves more flexibility, but all those options are perfectly fine.
I will note that the School Board Association footnotes for this policy say that these board requirements may be modified.
Yes, correct.
So
They're not statutory.
They're
Those
not
three.
statutory requirements. They are just best practice.
Right.
So if I could, then my last point on it is, maybe for clarity, if we were just to look at that second paragraph in that last sentence, it's just simply to insert a verb there, oversee compliance with applicable laws and regulations, and execute or administer or whatever action word you would like to use to capture, how you would enforce those following board requirements. Because you're not compliant, it's just overall compliance with applicable laws and the following board requirements. I think you need the
Like implement procedures for the following
yes.
board requirements.
Yeah.
So you want to require RMP? Is that? That's always an option.
You could just use the word implement the
I
following
think
board
that's-
requirements, so there's no reference.
Oh, I see.
Because it could be by best practice, it could be managerial discretion.
Could be guidance documents.
Yeah.
So implement the following board requirements.
So, okay. So how would then would you keep the second paragraph as is under this approach and just edit the fourth paragraph after the three numbers?
I was just going to add the implement in the second paragraph between the words
Oh.
the and following.
Keep the original edits and add the word implement.
I see.
Right.
Oversee compliance and implementation of,
Just oversee compliance with applicable laws and regulations and implement.
Oh, I get it.
There's
I'm
two
sorry.
actions, to oversee and to implement.
I see.
As opposed to overseeing the implementation.
got it.
Thank you.
No problem with that. That work for staff.
Other questions, feedback? So Julie, if you'll read it again.
The second paragraph reads, "The superintendent or designee, as well as principals and other building level supervisors, shall oversee compliance with applicable laws and regulations and implement the following board requirements."
That's good.
1 through 3 stay the same, we keep the strikeout.
Keep the strikeout of the paragraph under the numbered list.
Any other questions, comments, follow-up, feedback? Okay. So both Mr. Ramey and Dr. Crane have it documented. So if there are no other feedback or response to the recommendation by Vice Chair Haggerty, then I will entertain a motion to move this forward for first reading with those changes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Hearing none, the motion carries. Okay. Thank you. Now we really are ready for you, Mr. Smith. Sorry about that earlier.
Our last policy that we're going to review today is about vandalism, is 6550. I will note that we do have in our student code of conduct property damage listed as a level 2 infraction, punishable by short-term suspension up to 5 days, or with mitigating circumstances, I guess, in severity, potentially longer, 6 to 10, or longer than that, long-term suspension for a level 2 infraction. I'm sure if you're considering whether or not something burned down versus something got spray painted, you would consider that for in the student code of conduct. So with our vandalism policy here, we just start at the beginning of the policy defining what it is. The willful destruction of school property, equipment, and materials. And again, this was reminded by Tricia the other day that this is under the umbrella of how we care for and manage the equipment, materials, and supplies that the district owns and operates, right? That the board will not tolerate vandalism and may seek criminal prosecution and take any legal action available for recovery of the loss. All losses that may be due to vandalism will be reported and recorded in accordance, and we added the word any. Do you see a blue word any?
We see both blue words this time.
And recorded in accordance with any procedures established by the superintendent or designee. And you will know we do have our Senior Director for Security Russ here with us. The principal shall notify the superintendent or designee immediately of any forceful entry that results in theft and or damages to school property. The last sentence speaks to our policies on student behavior apply to any student who's participated in vandalizing school property. I think
I do have two late-breaking additions to throw to you from texted by Jonathan, recovering with, and possibly on some pain meds, but he seemed lucid by text message. And he made two great suggestions. One is in the second paragraph where we reference forceful entry, he suggested adding forceful or unauthorized entry. So it's not, you don't need to push your way into the school. If you sneak into the school, that's also not okay. And the final addition was, since we do reference student behavior policies on vandalism and disciplinary cases, it might as well say the obvious that staff can also receive consequences for intentional vandalism. So he suggested adding a final sentence. Additionally, any employee who vandalizes school property may be subject to disciplinary action up to and including dismissal.
Comments, questions on what's here as well as Jonathan's two additions. Mr. Herschel.
I don't love the word immediately because we don't know what situation might be going on, and we have had conversations that principals need to make sure everything is, deal with whatever is going on first, and the word immediately is kind of like, I just don't think it's a good policy to say to a principal, you have to immediately do this, while they may be dealing with something else.
Promptly.
Including investigating who actually did it.
Right, and the other part I would add is, if a principal is not at their school, who notifies the superintendent or designee? So should it be principal or however you phrase it? But if a principal's not there, who does it?
It could be, I think those are both great points. I would suggest the principal or designee. So, if the principal's not on campus, the AP presumably or somebody else would let the superintendent know. And then to modify, and then just change immediately to promptly, recognizing that, or whatever, maybe within an hour after the crisis is resolved or whatever.
In a reasonable
In a
time.
reasonable time. And,
I can't tell if that's a response or a different, do
I
you
got
have
a different question.
Okay.
Or just take out immediately is another good suggestion, just a notification requirement without a time frame. I think any of those are fine. That's a good point. Immediately may not be feasible in some circumstances.
Looking for faces, responses, reactions.
On that, strike the word or change it to promptly.
I don't have a preference. I mean, do we need to micromanage that to say? I don't think so, but
Well, promptly just kind of says, as soon as you can, so I don't see any harm in that.
yeah, I'm open to
Language.
whatever. I don't have any strong preference on it, but just not using it immediately.
I do think you need to put some expectation of
Okay.
time in it.
We've got them
Because
promptly.
because at the very least, that becomes you might have thought that was promptly, but I did not. And it's just not, to sort of build the right emphasis around, and it becomes a learning tool, quite frankly, for administrators in terms of sometimes judgment.
And it shouldn't be, well, I was planning to notify you at the beginning of the next school year.
And the whole idea is that it is vandalism, so you're
Right.
trying to attend to an issue that's happening right now. So I think
There's
My
almost
opinion.
no one I can't reach by cell phone even while I'm yelling at somebody else.
We've acknowledged you got a few superpowers, though. Okay, so, are you responding to this or different?
Well, it's the same sentence. I have a question.
Okay, let's resolve if we want
Okay.
promptly here first.
That sounds reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, that works for me.
Okay, all right. So I feel like we have some consensus.
Promptly.
Do you also like or unauthorized? I saw some nods.
I definitely
And the
think
addition
that's
about
appropriate.
employee
Yes.
as well. Okay, so we can make
We have
those.
consensus on both of Jonathan's two recommendations.
Yes.
Oh, and don't worry, we'll reread all
Yeah.
of the changes. Dr. Ingham, Ms. Evans.
This may be a silly comment, but I don't know. The definition of vandalism, and what if someone were to be willfully destroying a property for the sake of good, for the sake of like saving somebody's life or doing something like to escape from breaking a window to escape from a fiery, a building's on fire, or I don't know. I mean, I'm just.
Interesting question. I hadn't thought.
It's a very interesting question.
There wouldn't be
Would we
criminal
consider it
liability under the circumstances
Yeah.
because you need to have a bad intent for any crime.
Yeah.
But could somebody be unwarily violating board policy if they're doing the right thing? I broke something to free a student who was trapped, but now the thing is damaged and destroyed and it costs $1,000 and,
Yeah.
should have been trouble. So I don't know if you want to do some more
Ill-intent.
tinkering.
I like the
So
thought
I
of being
do-
intentional in the language.
Right. I do think,
Or malicious.
But vandalism already is defined as malicious.
ill intent.
I think willful, maybe willful already captures it. I think willful to me, willful destruction means you're doing it
The will
knowing
to
you
destroy.
should
Right,
not.
exactly. The
Knowing
will
you
to
should not
destroy.
destroy. It doesn't mean, it doesn't, you can intentionally destroy something for the right reasons. I think willful, to me, it just conjures criminal law, which is, it's a mens rea or an intent requirement in criminal law that you knew what you were doing was wrongful.
But to Dr. Ing's question, willful, if you are, in the example he gave, you are willingly doing it.
It's- right,
But
it's-
the vandalism, I just looked up, and it's action involving deliberate destruction of, or property, of damage to property or public or private property. So it's, you are doing it willful, whether it's for
purpose.
good or not.
On purpose, I think what I'm saying is on purpose and willful are kind of subtly different concepts. Willful means conscious awareness of wrongfulness to me. But we could add words to make
I
it
was just
clear.
thinking like willful and malicious or something.
Right, willful and malicious, or willful and intentionally wrongful, or knowingly wrongful.
Okay. All the same line?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Mr. Sorry.
So that's interesting. I thought you were going to go in the other direction because this like restricts the number of cases that you could call vandalism, and I think creates defensive. Whereas the kid, so I wasn't being malicious. I was just having fun. Oh, we were just joking around. Oh, we saw it on TikTok, right? We didn't mean to hurt anybody, right? I mean, and so I was even thinking about should it have gone the other way, not just willful, but like willful or reckless, where it might not have had a malicious intent, but if someone was doing something very irresponsible that resulted in a lot of property damage, would that be vandalism? So I was looking at it from that point of view, and I could see reasons why, okay, maybe that was wrong, but you didn't want to call that vandalism, right? You just wanted to only limit it to the willful part. But then in talking with Mr. Swanson up here, I saw down here in the second paragraph, the principal shall notify or designate immediately of any forceful injuries that results in theft and or damages to school property. Well, now that any damages to school property would include the stuff you're talking about where you might not have had willful destruction. It just was any damage. So instead of theft and or damages to school property, should that say theft and or vandalism?
Damages is broader in that.
Yeah.
Right.
it is.
Right, with that,
Yeah.
right.
And so
that-
do we want to limit it? Do we want to expand it? Or do we just want it just limited to vandalism?
Well, clearly for, I think, disciplinary action against staff or students, you need a willfulness concept.
You need that willful, okay.
Right, or some
intent.
level of intent. It
Some
could be
intent has to be
recklessness, would be,
clear.
I think recklessness is about as low as I would go.
Okay.
And it wouldn't be a crime without, I just pulled the statute, it's, the statute for criminal liability is willful or malicious.
Okay.
So I think willful captures on purpose, you broke something knowing it was wrong. You could expand it to include reckless, and then I think you make a good point, Mr. Haggerty, that the damages to school property is not limited to vandalism unless we change that language. That would suggest a tree broke a window, you got to report that. That's damage to school property.
Could you say willful or malicious?
That was one of your
Yeah.
words.
Yeah, I just didn't know whether it's and or.
I would say or here.
I want to, because it's the lower level of intent,
Yeah.
reckless, maybe.
I think malicious seems like a higher
It does,
level to
that's-
me. Willful is just awareness that what you're doing is
Is wrong.
So I think to your point, to your example, if someone's doing the right, the morally and ethically correct thing, helping someone altruistically, and that involves breaking something, we wouldn't say that's willful vandalism. That's not, there's no awareness of wrong.
Oh, okay, I said, yeah.
So can you read that? Are you going to say willful or malicious? Is that the addition here?
Well, can
I'm
I,
comfortable with that.
after Ms. Edmonds, I have a suggestion that
Yes.
may mean we don't need either, or the word malicious.
Are you on the first sentence, Sam?
I was going to address something in the second sentence that relates to it all.
Oh, okay.
So go ahead, Ms. Evans.
So back at the principal shall notify the superintendent or the principal or designate. Why are we singling out forceful or unauthorized? Because if this occurs during the school day and a student or staff member vandalizes the property, I'm just curious why that's singled out.
In my opinion, what I saw, the main intent of this policy wasn't for students. This was for what happens after.
After.
And it makes mention at the end about students. We're making it more about students and staff now, so it may need some additional.
That's a great distinction, Mr. Smith. Because you see where all of our heads went, which is
I took it from a friend from yesterday who made the same comment with Trish Posey.
That's a really good point. Huh.
the statute for students, students shall not intentionally damage or deface or attempt to damage or deface any school property or the personal property of another. That's how we handle it in the student code of conduct.
So that's funny. So when you read that at the beginning, I didn't say my first comment, which was, why do we need vandalism? I already know we have a policy against students defacing property. But that's actually why, now that the student says that, that's why you're recommending we look at this policy, because it isn't about students, because students would be handled in the code of conduct.
Right.
So do we need,
distinction. Right.
do we need the words that the Wake County Board of Education will not tolerate vandalism? Because to me, if you just take that out, you don't work, what it says, vandalism is the willful destruction of school property, et cetera. And we may see criminal prosecution and take any legal action. That way we are looking at each case individually and not boxing ourselves into anything or requiring it. And that way, if someone is breaking in to save somebody, clearly we're not going
We'll
to
tolerate that.
We would tolerate it.
We'll be fine with that.
Yeah, I don't think that's legally required at all. It's just model NCSBA language, probably just meant to send a strong signal that the board is
That way we
strongly
don't have to
opposed
worry
to
about
vandalism.
saying whether something is malicious or not. We can just kind of have
Well, that's a fair point, especially
what
now that
vandalism is, and then if someone does it for whatever purpose, we can prosecute them if we choose. But that's,
I think that makes sense. Then it neatly ties into the criminal standards we talked about. Willful vandal destruction is a crime that you may seek prosecution for that. You're not necessarily saying that you oppose all forms of vandalism, because you can imagine there might be some forms where it's justified.
right.
No problem with deletion of that phrase either. As long as it's up to you all.
it's very good distinctions, especially now that we know what Mr. Smith meant by
That-
policy.
That helped a lot.
Yes.
So the beginning of the policy would then read, because now we're going to strike core malicious that we had considered inserting earlier, it would read, vandalism is the willful destruction of school property, equipment, or materials, and the Wake County Board of Education may seek criminal prosecution and take any legal action available for recovery of the loss.
Yeah.
Second sentence.
Probably ought to say recovery of any loss, since we're,
Yes, that's
it's a
true.
definite article.
Yeah, instead of the loss, yeah.
Okay.
This may be an example when we call the School Boards Association after, hey, we have a better version of your policy for you.
Right.
Courtesy of the Wake Policy Committee.
You can tell us when you're ready to read the second sentence with Jonathan's changes.
Should we read that back? Do you have that, Julie? You want me to read it?
The second
Second
paragraph?
paragraph of Jonathan's changes? Or no?
All
Yeah.
losses that may be due to vandalism will be reported and recorded in accordance with any procedures established by the superintendent or designee. The principal or designee shall notify the superintendent or designee promptly of any forceful or unauthorized entry that results in theft and/or damages to school property. And then we have the addition of a full sentence after the policies on student behavior apply to any student. Additionally, I don't have that full sentence.
I read it too fast. What I had jotted down from Jonathan is, additionally, any employee who vandalizes school property may be subject to disciplinary action up to and including dismissal.
Is that
I'd say
willful?
willfully.
Okay.
Just, if you want to capture the concept of willful, again, that's what, obviously it wouldn't be accidental destruction of property.
Waiting for Dr. Crane to capture it all.
Up to and including dismissal.
Yeah.
Additionally, any employee who willfully vandalizes school property may be subject to disciplinary action up to and including dismissal.
Okay, I'm looking for faces, head nods. Okay, so now it looks like we're ready to make a motion to, oh, sorry, Dr. Reed.
Should we add like the reference to what, for the students, the policy on, that you had mentioned, that there was another policy?
So we did list the policy, it just says policies on student behavior shall apply.
Okay,
So I don't think we have to list which policy.
Otherwise, we have to keep track. If you
Yeah.
change another policy.
But I was just
you
about to
have
say, we
change
don't
this
do,
one.
we decided not to do that with the
Yeah.
migration, because somebody
Or-
has to be responsible to change every policy,
Gotcha.
every time a policy number changes. So, thank you for bringing that up. We haven't talked about this time, but when we started the migration, we decided not to footnote or insert policy numbers in policy, because every time we add policy, someone would have to be responsible to find all the policies with any reference to a policy number. So, thank you for bringing that up, because we have not discussed that. Thank you. Mr. Raby, did you have your hand up again, or were you?
No, sorry.
All right, so I think we are ready for a motion to move this to first reading, which we will then be able to see it all together. And it's first reading, so we can have a discussion.
So moved.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please vote by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Certainly not where we started, certainly not where you started, but great work.
Thank you.
So the last item on the agenda is policy 4003, translating policies for students and parents. This policy sets out that the board recognizes that there are many students and parents in the school system whose primary language is not English. The board further recognizes the importance of communicating policies of the school system to all students and parents. As funds permit, to the extent practicable, and as otherwise required by law, the school system will provide translations of pertinent school system information and policies to those students and parents whose primary language is not English. That is almost directly from the School Board Association model policy. It's almost exactly as Orange County Schools has this very same policy. So we're not out of step with either the School Board Association or other neighboring districts on how this policy presents. You asked that it be brought for discussion, so we have with us our Chief of Communications, Lisa Liddon, and our Senior Director of Translation Services,
Angela Mills.
Angela Mills.
Thank you for joining us. I think some of you have had the great privilege of seeing you at our Spotlight on Students, so thank you for joining us here at the board table. And great to have you at the table, Ms. Liddon.
It's a long day for you.
So we are here to discuss this policy with you, make sure we have the appropriate staff at the table to answer any questions you might have, and just engage with you on this one.
All right, perfect. Anybody ready to get us started?
I did look up just a few key details today.
Okay.
So, for example, our website says at the top of it, for international families, it lists 7 languages: Spanish, Chinese, French, Vietnamese, Korean, Arabic, and Hindi. And then using Google Translate, this is our website, not our policies and school materials. Through Google Translate, we do offer that in 103 languages in the pull-down menu. So anything on our website can be translated into 103, which was informative for me. And I also learned this week that when we stream our YouTube videos, we do have closed captioning available.
In English and translated in all the languages available on Google.
Okay.
I did not know that. That's actually good for the public to hear.
I'll add just very briefly a little legal context here. So that there was an OCR complaint several years ago about language services for parents with limited English proficiency. I worked on that resolution agreement. We came up with an extremely robust language assistance plan, which I believe is still being implemented. You're long out of the monitoring period and can change course, but to my knowledge, that's why you have a department in your school district that provides those services. So I think you're currently, I haven't audited regularly, but you're fully in legal compliance, and I think OCR was quite impressed actually with the plan that your staff developed that goes in, and the legal requirements are not crystal clear. It's not a regulation that says here's what you do. You just have to make the information accessible. But OCR recognizes you can't possibly translate every written document into every language spoken by every person in your school community that's hundreds of languages, literally more than 100 languages, right?
Yeah.
And some of them it's hard to find a translator for. Some languages aren't even written languages or don't have a robust written language system. So OCR just expects you to do something, you're reasonable. Depending on the nature of the document, it's more inclined to be something that's required to be translated. An IEP, a student suspension notice, absolutely, we should make every effort to get written translations. In other cases, OCR, in negotiations with them, they said it's acceptable to just get someone on the phone to explain a document to someone. To just make your best efforts. So I do think your policies and procedures, other than this, probably your procedures are legally compliant, probably go a bit beyond what the law requires. And this is just a sort of a stock NCSBA policy that says you're going to comply with the law.
And I'll just add one additional point of context. That was my introduction to the district as a deputy, that particular OCR complaint. Part of the sticking point in terms of what's required legally and what's best practice and what's the right thing to do is we were contemplating LEP parents and families that we are not legally responsible in terms of providing services like we do for students. But there was an expectation that our families be able to access the accessibility of district information, forms, knowledge to support their role as a parent. It was very newish. And we are still well ahead of certainly what's required, but even what's even contemplated in some other districts with regards to how this is done, because it was not, we don't contemplate LEP parents as a stakeholder in the district necessarily, but we know that we want all of our parents to be able to access, be informed, contribute, and have agency in how they support their students. So, and this had to be a part of it.
Thank you for the context of feedback. Okay. Ms. Waters.
I was wondering if this policy is centered specifically on written communication. And I asked this from a place of thinking about, for example, an IEP meeting, and then thinking about other languages, including American Sign Language. Is there any requirement, or does this policy speak to that, or is this mainly for written communication?
So the department is the Department of Translations and Interpretations. Angela, do you want to give a primer on the difference?
Certainly, yes. The department provides interpreting and translation services of spoken language exclusively. American Sign Language is provided by our Department of Special Education. The difference between interpreting and translation: in interpretation, you convey the message in real time, verbally. In translation, the service is provided with a delay. It has to be written, it has to be read, understood, processed, refined to be able to access the audience that you're trying to reach. So it takes a little bit more time. And depending on the length of the document and the context, the register and the content, it may take 2, 3, 4 days, sometimes even more. It also depends on the availability of a qualified translator in that specific content.
Okay, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
So to add some additional context to that, for this policy, it covers the language interpretation and translation, both of in-person meetings and of written documents. Not in this policy, but I think more to your question, we do have a responsibility to provide accessibility to all of our school information to all families with disabilities. That's under the website accessibility law, for which we also had an OCR complaint that was resolved. So behind the scenes on our PDF documents and on our websites and in our videos, there's coding done so that if a family or if a parent or if a member of the community has a visual impairment or a hearing impairment, that they have access to that material, those documents, those videos. And it looks different depending on what the disability could be. They could be using a screen reader, so we code our website and our PDFs and our materials so that the screen reader can interpret the documents. It could be closed captioning on our videos. It could be captioning on our images and on our photos. There's a series of laws that oversee that we also comply with. So for instance, for your board meetings. They're closed captions after they're posted, so that if somebody with a hearing impairment was to watch the video, they could read the captions if they could not hear the audio.
And that's in how many languages?
I don't know the exact number, all of them.
Okay. That's sort of why this had come up, because we had talked about what the word pertinent was, and I didn't know that YouTube, that all our videos did that. And do we know if that families know that that is an option? I mean,
So as part of the language assistance plan, there is specific language written to communicate out that translation services are available for limited English proficiency parents.
So one of the things that came out of that review many years ago is that for every child who is already in the district and every child who enrolls, there is now a statement on the enrollment form that we had to capture for the ones that were already here that asked about other languages that are spoken or necessary, so that we could then note that in NCWISE or now in Power School, so that we can know automatically which families need things in other languages and which languages.
So yes, we reach out proactively to those families that require it.
Thank you.
Ms. Waters?
One more question. And so, Mr. Hershey brought up the word pertinent. So just kind of wondering what the threshold for determining what is pertinent. And I'm thinking about my own child's school. He goes to Brentwood Elementary, and all the documents come home in English and Spanish. So what is kind of the threshold for determining pertinent and when these services will be available?
The definition is, in order for the parent to be able to understand school processes, so if it is a school process that they need to understand, then that is pertinent.
But maybe it's not an event or activity that falls outside of it.
We include events as well. Yes.
We do send people to events as they are requested. I think part of where this may be headed is, so, and this goes back to something Mr. Haggerty said way earlier. What is available to families versus what they access are not always the same things, right? And so us knowing that things are available and talking about it here is really of a help and support to our families. But it really is at the school level where there is more knowledge of who specifically needs what and the ability to look at that documentation. That, for example, at a school that's sending something home in 2 languages, because that covers the vast majority of their students, but does what they send home also create and have in it the language or the accessibility for what to do if you need a language other than the 2 in which it goes home? And I don't know.
It does. So one of the requirements of the language assistance plan is that at the bottom of all of our templates, so when a parent sends out a newsletter, there's the language assistance statement on the bottom of all of those communications that go home that state in the top 7 languages that if they need help understanding that document, for them to call the number.
And when they call the number, they get routed to a translator over the phone in any language, correct? So someone can then talk to them on the incoming call.
And you see these on posters in schools, and the number is there, and the top 15 or whatever,
Top
7 languages are there. But again, something that would be helpful perhaps as a follow-up, notwithstanding whatever the language in the policy is, maybe having an understanding of how much what is accessed, right? So that we can see what kind of penetration we're getting with the language assistance plan.
Because I think that's clearly the biggest issue for me. You know what you do, but I guess ultimately we don't really know if parents know that they have access to all of that information. Because of course we think about kids who may are fluent in English now, their parents are, and they're like, well, a parent can't read that, so they don't think about giving it to them anyway. And we also know how things get lost in their book bag. So I guess I'm also not sure what it looks like. I can tell you because I got a call from a parent out of school. They didn't know that they could get information. It was the principal's voicemail that they leave on Sundays. Well, it's only in English. And I had not considered that until I got a call from a parent that they were each week translating for another family.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't be necessarily pertinent, but it is pertinent as a parent. how I actually know what they're doing at their school sometimes.
We can follow up with that. There is, as part of our communication processes, there may be it may be a technical error. The principals who send out the voice calls also send out the written version of that in an email, but that's relying on the email being correct. And my guess is that's probably
Or
where
text message being correct, that's a feedback. Because
yeah,
some
that
of them send
they
text.
have the correct contact information.
That's right.
I can follow up with that afterwards.
And that's actually what I found out at the school.
Yeah.
Is they didn't have the parents' correct information.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
but to your point though, if that's a mishap often, if they don't have a parent advocate who says, hey, this parent isn't getting the information.
Yeah, all these plans are perfect except that we have humans that are in charge of them.
That's why I always ask about RMP, because I want to know, do schools have the back end to understand what their responsibility is, especially when the policy is very small like this.
So tell me about the 7 languages listed on the homepage again, because, I just clicked on Chinese and there's nothing clickable. So what's supposed to happen?
So we probably should have planned this better, but those are actually in the process of being updated. With our new website, we added the ability to have the automatic translation, which you'll see up on the top right, the ability to translate it into all languages.
So if I click here,
Yeah.
more happens, maybe?
Yeah, so the developer is working on having those links on the top bar be able to automatically go to the website of the translated, and it's at the developer right now.
Okay.
Do you see that? Yep. So
And is all of that based on Google Translate?
It is.
Because there's
Yeah.
a lot of concern about Google Translate.
Yeah, so there has been some studies done on that recently. Google Translate had an update right at the beginning of the pandemic in which they used AI to improve the Google Translate. So your understanding of a Google Translate, if it was based on something more than 3 years ago, is probably spotty. It's certainly much improved. Our the new website was built to have an override of code that we try to do in most of the languages, and I'll give you an example. If the website states, go to the meeting at Dillard Drive, we don't want them to translate the word Dillard Drive, so we will go into the code and add a special tag that keeps it in the English. That said, the automatic translation in our languages, the schools also use the Google Translate. It is not perfect, so I'm going to repeat what I hear Angela say all of the time. If it is something that you really want parents to know about, then bring it through her department so that they can make sure that they're translating it accurately.
And I would like to explain,
Yep.
if I may.
Yep.
Also, it is very important to communicate very short sentences, straightforward, avoid slang, avoid cutesy words, idiomatic expressions. Those are most likely not handled by Google Translate or DeepL or any other artificial automated generated translation.
Right. But we do want it to be culturally responsive, right? So when I first opened this and saw it, I was actually shocked because we've just today and then our last policy committee meeting, we have policies that have a lot more language, examples are 1 to 2 pages, and so this seems very thin to me, especially in light of the equity work and equity goals that we have. So I don't have the solutions today, but I feel like it needs more added.
If I can build on that, I think this is a good policy, and I think we do have wonderful translation services, and I appreciate when you've given tours of the office to like other elected officials who've come by who didn't really know all that we do. I think to Ms. Edmonds' point, this was a situation I was working on earlier this week with a family from South America, and it wasn't an issue of the translation of any documents, but the issues that they were citing were more about like engagement, understanding, and context. You had a situation where they were faced with a letter that had said a short-term suspension, but then in our due process, that could go into a long-term suspension and then alternative learning program, and you talk about jargon.
Right.
They didn't know what that meant, and they were concerned that they were being kicked out of public schools and were going to have to find an alternative. They thought they were having to go find a private school. And so the policy itself is fine, but to Sedman's point, maybe, like, and we've talked about engagement as part of our strategic plan, like building a more robust engagement plan into policy that looks at kind of meeting some of these families where they are, finding a better way to provide, more orientation and context, especially if you're not, you could be from another country, you could be from another state, and you might not really know how our schools and policies work together. So it's bigger than this, and I appreciate you letting me roam a little bit, but I thought it was relevant to what you're saying.
Well, I don't think it is bigger, right? So take a point of privilege as a chair. That is the concern. The policy is short and sweet. The problem is when it's our policy, we don't even know how it's being governed. And like this is a great example of an appeal letter is pertinent, right? And so if they're not getting it, not only just language, but also contextually. And I'm sure you know this, Ms. Nelson, but when there's, especially building on Ms. Emma's point around equity, to reduce my tangent is language justice training is significant amount of work of thinking through everything you do that requires you to be thoughtful in your practices and policies, not just translation, but culturally responsive, but also contextually. I don't know how we do this as a school district, but we are talking about parents who have decisions being made for them because they don't have the context and aren't sure what the resource is. I wouldn't even know the answer, right? Like, would we refer them to the translation line if they needed all of this context? But that could be after they already found a private school because they thought that's what we wanted, was them to find their own alternative learning environment. So I guess I'm just helping think through how do we... Bigger than the policy, but definitely about our equity and our strategic plan. Ms. Nelson.
I'd like to mention that when it comes to translating a letter, such as student due process final notice on an appeal hearing, as translators, we have to remain impartial and completely accurate and render a faithful content of the message, translation of the message. So it is not a responsibility of the translations department to explain the process or the policy to the parent. However, we serve as a liaison. We bridge the gap with the language access. But if the parent has a question, then the parent needs to talk to the hearing officer, who is the expert in the subject matter. And the translator or the interpreter will act as a gap, as a bridge.
Who is present at that meeting?
Who is
Absolutely.
present? Yes. So that is done during the appeal hearing. During the appeal hearing, interpreters, in this case myself, provide language access. Then the hearing officer, after the panel makes a decision, provides a letter. Translations department translates the letter. If the parent calls the Office of Student Due Process with a question, then the student due process person needs to call an interpreter in my department to provide interpretation. But the explanation of the content of the letter has to come from a person of the due process department. We're not to talk about anything related to that.
100%. If I could just add to that, so the language assistance plan is very detailed on all of this, and OCR was very upfront in telling us early on. They did not. They recognize it's unrealistic to expect every written document will be translated into all 100 languages proactively. They said nobody does that. New York City Schools doesn't do that. Nobody does that. So it was all negotiated. How far we go, and that's where we came up with in 7 languages that are most predominant, which captures 90+% of the families in your district. There will be proactive translation of certain key, very important legal documents, IEPs, student suspension notices. I mean, just the stuff that informs you of your rights and appeal rights and things like that. Many of those are proactively translated and sent in the native language to the family if they're coded properly, which, as Kathy said, they capture the incoming families who are in need of language assistance. And then another layer of support that's offered is putting this the interpretation translation notice all over everything. So there you see on the website, if you need language assistance, again, in the top 7 languages, call this number and they can route you to an live interpreter. I got this document in English, I can't understand it. I speak whatever, Portuguese. No problem, we can get you in touch with a Portuguese interpreter, interpret it over the phone, or get a written translation. So that's another layer of support. But it's very detailed in the plan. So just so you all know, there's more. The policy, this is the NCSBA policy, it's just meant to say that you should be reasonable. Your practices go well beyond that. We're kind of carefully thought out over a period of several months.
Ms. Waters?
Well, I appreciate Ms. Edmonds' comments about in comparison with other policies, so thank you for that. My question is more about processes. So when we have families who are coming as newcomers to America and when they enroll in the district, are they provided with information at that time to let them know that these services are available? And how are they assisted in the enrollment process? Because I would imagine they would need this same level of support in their initial contact with the district. So just wanted to know a little bit more about the process.
So this is not my area of expertise, but I will share that our district is unique in that we, long before I got here, identified that that was a challenge. And so we developed an office. It's the Center for International Enrollment. When you walk into the front door, you'll see it. It's on the right. That office is only role is to support families who are enrolling from other countries so that they can both get the best service and so that their students, if they have a need, that those needs can be identified. So they do a lot of work in translating documents from home country so that they can understand what's the appropriate grade level, explaining to them the way that the United States school system works, which is different than any other school system in the world, identifying if their students need different services, helping to work through those tests and processes, and to identify if the family is limited English proficiency and needs additional services. I will 100% bet that Kathy knows a lot more about this than I do.
Center for International Enrollment has grown over the years, and I'll tell you, there's a tension between what schools do and what the Center for International Enrollment does that kind of wanes back and forth over the years based on what a school is able to do. In some schools, you may have a staff person that can handle some of the needs that come when an international student enrolls. In some schools, you don't have the staff on site to do that, and so the Center for International Enrollment plays a bigger role in that. It is a primary point of entry for families. Generally, they will come here first, and then then once they get what they need here, we send them to schools. But occasionally, families will start at the school level because their neighbor told them that's where you got to go, and then they end up over here anyway. It is a vital part of our work. It is smaller than it needs to be. It needs to be larger, needs to have more staff. The dollars that we receive to support our ELL students are primarily focused on providing school-based support to those students through ELL teachers. And so it is only a small portion of the funds that we receive that we use to manage at the district level. So that may be an area that we need to pay more attention to as we move forward, to maybe specify local resources to grow that, because they're not coming from the state. And again, we are here and we have the services. Most of our international families do come through the CIE at some point, either immediately or the school will send them here. I believe that for international families, they'll be here at some point. I think it is for families who are maybe already in our district, who may have parents who don't have English as a first language, that are trying to find ways to understand what's coming home from school or to support their students and be fully engaged, that there's more of a need in terms of how that happens. Because this policy is around how we provide resources in different languages, and I think we've got a lot of that. But the piece around engagement and being welcoming and doing the piece earlier, where clearly we don't want the folks who are in translation services to be providing advice to families or interpretation of things, but the folks in due process have a role as well, that is understanding what the rules are and letting parents know what their rights or due process might be. But who has the role of advising the parents on how to navigate the system? Right. That's the piece that neither one of those folks has.
And especially
so
because it's a
the-
complicated system.
That's right, that's right. And so that's what's sort of swirling around in my head as the gap is,
Right.
You read my, sorry, Dr. Ing said exactly what we're thinking at the top
I
of this
didn't hear
table.
you. What brilliant thing did you say?
Ombudsman.
yeah, that's right.
It's a gap in our system.
That's right, that's right. And so that's what that role is.
I know.
And that's where I was headed. That's where that role is contemplated to help fill those gaps.
Well, and I think there's an opportunity in the strategic plan, like you mentioned, when it comes to community engagement, about looking to see how we're doing that with families who do not speak English, and are there opportunities for us to help provide information about the school system and how the school system works.
And also, I mean, for our schools that have high number of families where English isn't their first language, I mean, it's a great PLT to have them go through language justice so that they do understand the unique needs that families don't often. Some of our English as first language fairs don't ask for because it's hard to navigate, and it's even more important if English isn't their first language. So, Ms. Evans, Vice Chair
So
Haggerty.
actually, Vice Chair Haggerty.
I thought he had his hand up, but he said he did.
No, I'm asking you. So I wanted to make sure I understood what you said. Am I hearing support for working on this policy to improve it, or do we need an R&P for this policy, or are you suggesting a new policy or filtering it all through the strategic plan? I was trying to understand where you were going.
So I think, as Lisa had mentioned, like the strategic plan would be the place to start. That would provide the direction. We have that pillar about family and community engagement. And from there, again, I don't think that specifically policy 4003 needs change as much as if the strategic plan identifies that we need policy to direct more international engagement, or providing navigators, or utilizing an Office of Ombudsman's office, whatever shape it might take. But I guess first we need to identify and commit to it. Then, again, a lot of our policies are coming to us as recommendations from the School Board Association. This might be something where we're forging new ground. And so we want to be, if we're pioneering it, I think we'd want to do a lot of research, see what other districts are doing. And I think it would be a lengthier process to get it right and thorough. But then eventually I would see a separate policy related to this, but not necessarily replacing this. But that's just like 1 to 9 opinions.
Yeah, well, I understand, because I'd like to see it come back. I think we need more. I think we need more spelled out here. Again, and I don't think that's unreasonable based on. I mean, we've sat here with 12 bullet points about purchasing materials.
100%
That's a bad example.
And being,
But I agree with you, Ms. Evans. Something so important.
I do think it's important to point out.
environmental
I do think it's important to point out that this policy becomes something else that is bigger than what the policy is currently contemplating to support. And it may need to change the title, it may need to be a little different.
So I don't know. I mean, I want to push you back a little bit on that, because I don't know that I think that's the case, because this is our policy. If I'm reading this without good R&P, then I don't know what funds permit, right? Like, it's very limiting to someone on the other side who's a new principal reading this for the first time without some very clarity that you don't worry about the funds, someone else will figure that out. You make the ask appropriately for your families. Those are things that in this tiny policy that leave me, because I don't know what the R&P looks like. How do they know what's pertinent when they're new? How do they know that they don't have to figure out how much these things cost?
Well, and I'm not sure that pertinent and funds are what parents are concerned about.
I'm talking about the people who have to implement, right? So I'm saying if I'm a parent and I'm reading this, what is a new principal going to say to me? Do they have guidance to be able to adequately answer that question?
And I wonder, so the document that's behind this is the language assistance plan, which is very detailed and goes through exactly how we do it and what we do. And so I think maybe start by sharing that document.
And so that was 20 minutes ago that Neil whispered, should we share the language assistance plan with all the board members?
It is very rigorous. I will just say it was an intense negotiation with OCR. In my opinion, they had a flimsy basis for opening the investigation in the first place. little venting. But we ended up with something that was
I was
a
super
pretty remarkable
committed.
plan.
I was super committed to getting resources
Absolutely.
and language and orientation.
It led to
towards
creation
this.
of a new department and changing in district-wide practices. I mean, pretty comprehensive document.
So I think starting there is going to make sense. We can do that right away, share the language systems plan, and maybe have that sort of frame how we have our next discussion about what's in this policy and what's in that plan.
Does it seem more like this is like blanket policy versus the other one's more the program that explains the details, the difference between the how and why kind of thing? You know what I mean? Versus
That's what it
putting
sounds
all
like.
that in here.
Yeah, it's not my recommendation that we make this a 20-page policy. It's my recommendation
Mine either.
that when parents read this, that they understand that there is something that isn't limiting.
So can we say direct them? If they're reading this policy and they understand the policy as stated in and directs to where the plan is, would that resolve the?
I mean, without having seen the policy, I do, so I'm going to add to the second of the 9 views is, I do think as we build out our strategic plan and we see this document, then I feel like, at least for me, I'd have better recommendations on what should be in the policy. But if a parent called me now at this policy, I'm going to say, ask your principal. If I got a new principal, I don't know what they're going to say. Or if they even know that they should be looking for this guidance document.
It's interesting because I'm going to send them to that CIE.
So I think for me, sometimes when I'm looking on the website, it's like the information stops. And I think that if I'm understanding what your concern is, it's like you're reading this and you're like, okay, and you kind of give up because you're not
That's
really
exactly
sure
what I'm
like
afraid
that's
of.
your answer
That's right.
versus directing to more information. Like sometimes that link is missing.
I completely agree with you.
People can also define extent possible, practical,
That's true.
whatever, very differently.
Other perspectives in terms of next steps. Like I said, I agree with Vice Chair Hagerty's position of I will want to see this back to build out a policy.
Yeah, I think from a standpoint of the translation service, what you guys were saying that, translation service has to be just kind of an objective, basically translating. That's kind of how I read into this policy is that this is just strictly the translation part. Whatever else we do in terms of advocacy or helping the parents navigate the system, that's outside of this policy. That's how I would read it. But, that's kind of a more conversation that needs to.
Right, yeah, and I don't disagree with the objectivity of translation, but a parent does not know what pertinent is, and neither do I actually reading this.
I know, it's very, yeah, exactly.
Like, do I get my report card in a different language?
I'm trying to decide if I want to add to that, and I think I am going to. So my stance is that all of these policies are written by attorneys who are really smart and really precise in their language, but they're not necessarily accessible to families that speak English or do not speak English. So for that reason, we do spend a lot of time in our organization taking the jargon out, removing the language that's not, our stance is a 3rd grade reading level or below, so that it's accessible to families that speak English, families who might not necessarily have a college education or degree in education, families who may not necessarily be as literate as other families. So that work is done in our student handbook and on our website, where we do 2 things. We try to reduce the language so that it's accessible to all families, and then also point to the policy, per our attorney's advice, so that somebody who wants to dig deeper and fully understand what our legal obligation is has access to it. I don't know that we do that perfectly all the time, but that is the aim for other languages and in English to do. I don't expect that somebody would read this policy and understand that, but that's why on all of our materials, it has a very short sentence that says, in the 7 languages, if you need help understanding school processes, call this number, which is what we want them to know. Call this number. You don't have to decide what you need help on or not. If it's a cookie night or if it's your student report card, call this number and we will help you figure it out.
we will send you the language assistance plan.
Thank you.
That's a great start.
So from what I hear is that, okay, the policy leaves you wanting, and we have lots more language about how we do what we do behind this policy. So I envision perhaps an RMP that provides the greater detail, perhaps an overview of the language assistance plan, our translation and interpretation services, et cetera, the language help number if someone gets to the RMP. So that RMP, or gets to the policy and goes to the RMP, that RMP could provide the how of how the overarching governance language, this is what we do, what we expect of ourselves, and this is how we govern ourselves to do what we expect, and this is how we do it, is provided in another document behind it. How do you feel about that?
Well, and there may be space really for alignment of the language of the policy to what's in the language assistance plan that is more written towards the services and the opportunities that we're providing to families.
That's what I was pushing back on a little bit. I don't think it has to be a lot of language, but I do think it can be clear.
But it's a little different than what the intent, I think, of this was and where we're headed.
Right. Agreed. Any other feedback, thoughts, comments?
I just want to say thank you for bringing this to this policy. I mean, I think it's a great conversation. I really appreciate you giving, especially us newbies, a chance to put some input into what comes up before the policy board. So I appreciate that very much.
Before you have to implement them, right?
That's right. That's right.
Actually, thank you all for the ideas and feedbacks of places you want to start, and thank you, staff and our superintendent, for letting us push the envelope a little bit, because this is where we get most of our calls, is policy, and as we should. All right. And thank you, Mr. Raymond, for being with us. Thank you very much, Dr. Crane, who I know you always take feverish notes, so I appreciate it. I love that you still take them by hand.
Absolutely.
That's why I'm always watching to make sure we're making sure you have time to capture. Any other feedback? And thank you, Ms. Luton and Ms. Nelson, for joining us today. If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
We'll adjourn by acclamation.
All right.
So we won't take a vote, we'll just show by acclamation.
Thank you.
We'll go do some more good stuff in just a few minutes.
Yes.